How's it going, everyone? International Master Daniel Rensch. And this is a checkmate in one. Today we are solving tactics together again today. We will be learning to recognize patterns and enjoy the process of gaining rating points here. We're starting out at 1200 with a reset tactics trader rating. That's 153 points for solving a mate in 1 in 7 seconds, right? That seems like a little bit of inflation, but we know how harsh the tactics trainer can be as you increase your rating. So we're going to talk again about what the right process is to not only perform successfully in tactics trainer to help all of you increase your rating and brag to your friends, but of course, most importantly, to solve tactics in a way and to draw out conclusions from the exercises that will improve our chess games overall. Next problem. Let's do it. Let's see how quickly we can go. Can we go 1200 to 2000 today? Who knows? Okay, well, he just played queen to d6. So the first thing we recognize in each puzzle is where the opportunities are by recognizing what's weak about our opponent's position. Here there's a king on f8, which seems like a slightly precarious situation. Also, there's a knight on the rim, so I'm considering opportunities immediately to take on h5, and after g takes h5 to play queen takes h7. I'll be threatening mate, and if he runs, I have knight f5 check. So I feel like this should be the move, and sure enough, it's actually just a one-move answer for this one. If g takes h5, I would have played queen takes h7, threatening mate, as well as the fact that we have the knight coming into f5. So the recognition of what's weak in your opponent's position, of course, is a muscle you want to have all the time, and I always say that in a real game, we should already be aware of a lot of those things, so it's kind of something you have to build into your approach to puzzle solving that, you know, theoretically you don't really have to have in a real game, because if you're a focused player, then you should be aware of these things. But I disagree that it's not something that's not worth highlighting, because very often we actually take advantage of, or we sort of we take for granted that we know everything that's going on in the position. We just assume we do, and when something changes or there's something maybe weaker about where our opponent has placed a piece compared to before, we may miss tactical opportunities. So it's still a very good muscle to build, even for beginners, and that's kind of where we're starting today. Okay, immediately my perspective has to be on some idea to take advantage of the rook and the knight. I see them on the same diagonal, and I have a light square bishop. So d6 takes, and then bishop to d5 comes to mind. It's a skewer, a fork of the rook on a2 and the knight on g8, and then I can bring my rook down. So let's start with d6. My immediate recognition of these pieces being on a diagonal that I have a bishop of that color must be, at least it's the right place to start. So I'm not saying that the first instinct will always be correct in these scenarios. Most of the time my first instinct probably will be correct, but the most important thing is what we're talking about. And that is, what I'm talking about as far as how to recognize that yourself, is you look at the pieces you have and the pieces your opponent has. I would guarantee that in this puzzle, many 1200s, if we're assuming that's what I started at, would miss something like that, because it involves a clearance sacrifice. You have to sacrifice the d6 pawn in order to clear this square on d5. And I would bet you that this rook just took a pawn on a2. Like perhaps black had a rook on b8, it came down to b2, it took a pawn on a2, which seems to create this outside passed a pawn for black. And if white doesn't find this opportunity to expose the rook and knight on the same diagonal, you could argue that white doesn't really have an advantage in this endgame at all. So this is a really important thing, and most of the time I'm right about that as far as my instincts are concerned regarding what your opponent's last plan was. And so I would bet that this rook neglected the 8th rank for a chance to win the pawns on the 2nd rank, which would make sense for black if not for this tactic. So good stuff to be aware of when we immediately see what the awkwardness is in our opponent's position. So here the awkwardness is immediately, of course, that there's a king on the 7th rank, and that we have this rook on the c-file. We also have this very forkable square, I like to call it, on e6. So we play an attraction sacrifice of the exchange to bring the king and queen to where we need them in order to deliver the goods. And we brought it in for the real thing, right? Vince Vaughn style. Moving on.